Week 9 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few wide receivers I looked at off the wire this week. The first receiver, Cedric Tillman of the Cleveland Browns. Tillman available in 81% of fantasy leagues. He was a nice pickup off the wire last week. Big game. And now, after a monster performance, he's going to be a must-own in pretty much all 10, 12-team leagues is Tillman. So the last two games, Week 7 versus the Bengals, 8 catches, 81 yards, a 2-point conversion, 12 targets. And Week 8 versus Baltimore, 7 catches, 99 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 9 targets. And him and Winston with the second team all season long have a good rapport. And obviously it showed in that ball game in the upset victory versus the Ravens in Week 8. So this week, decent matchup versus the Los Angeles Chargers. We saw Chris Olave just go over 100 yards in that ball game versus them. And Cedric Tillman, he was a guy a few years ago they were very high on, was his Cleveland Brown team, but obviously he didn't get the opportunities. But now since Amari Cooper got dealt a few weeks ago, Cedric Tillman stepped in and he's putting up numbers right now, available in 81% of fantasy leagues. Next receiver is Jalen McMillan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jalen McMillan, I know the numbers weren't great in the Week 8 ball game where he only had a carry, 17 yards on an end around and 4 catches, 35 yards on 7 targets. But right now, there's not much going on in the receiving game. Mike Evans out 2 more weeks minimum for this Tampa Bay Buc team. Sterling Shepard was banged up as well in Week 8 with a hamstring, but he did return into that one, but he was 100%. And Palmer they have as well on the roster. So Week 9, it's a ball game in Kansas City Monday night. Very tough game, no doubt about it. But it's also a game where they could be trailing early and often and have no choice but to throw the football 35, 40 times. So McMillan, while he's out there in 50% of fantasy leagues and getting an expanded role, obviously, with this Tampa Bay Buc team, he's definitely an ad off the wire this week. The next receiver, Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. So Downs, he had a nice ball game last week at the Houston Texans, and a second touchdown was called back. He wasn't in the end zone and stopped at the 1-yard line. Right now available in 53% of fantasy leagues. We saw good flashes from him in the middle weeks of the year, from Week 4 to Week 6 with Joe Flacco in their quarterback. And then Anthony Richardson, we know he's a quarterback that's not going to throw a whole lot and not put up a lot of yards on the board, but Downs definitely came out in Week 8 with a big one. So Week 5 at Jacksonville, 9 catches, 69 yards in that one. Week 6 at Tennessee, 7 catches, 66 yards, a touchdown. Week 7, a catch, 3 yards versus Miami. And Week 8 at Houston, 4 catches, 109 yards, and a touchdown on 13 rush yards. So Week 9, a good matchup on paper in Minnesota. Give up the most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. And we just saw last week Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp go out there and have big ball games. So Josh Downs obviously not in the league of those wide receivers, but definitely someone to add off the wire, available in 53% of fantasy leagues. The next wide receiver, Keon Coleman of the Buffalo Bills. So Coleman the last couple weeks, especially since Cooper's coming to town, he's getting better looks. He's getting easier coverage where number 1 corners are now obviously covering Amari Cooper. And Coleman's gone out there with his 2 best games of the season since the Cooper deal. Week 7 versus Tennessee, 4 catches, 125 yards, 7 targets. And Week 8, another solid game at Seattle, 5 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown. So a division matchup, Week 9 versus Dolphins. We know their defense isn't all that great. Marvin Harrison went out there and had a big performance, over 100 yards, and found the end zone. And Keon Coleman's coming into his own, and him and Josh Allen are starting to build a good rapport. Right now, he's available in 59% of fantasy leagues. The final wide receiver I looked at off the wire is Xavier Legette of the Carolina Panthers. Legette's been on the list on and off over the last few weeks, available in 85% of fantasy leagues. In the last 2 out of 3 weeks, he's found the end zone, is Legette. Week 6 versus Atlanta, 3 catches, 23 yards, a touchdown. Week 7 in Washington, a carry, 6 yards, 2 catches, 3 yards. And Week 8 at Denver, 4 catches, 34 yards, a touchdown on 7 targets. So we know this team's going nowhere this season. 1-7 on the year. Possibility Deontay Johnson traded within the next couple weeks before the NFL trade deadline. And Legette was a first-round pick for this Carolina Panther team. He could run the routes. He's a big receiver, and he's a deep ball threat as well. And with this Panther team going nowhere, and like I said, Deontay Johnson might be shipped out before the deadline where teams need wide receivers or contenders. He's definitely a wide receiver I look to get off the wire this week, available in 85% of fantasy leagues. That's a few wide receivers I look to add for Week 9 of the fantasy football season.